and welcome to our fourth session of fashion illustration. In this session, we will be learning how to render a fashion figure and how to render different kinds of fabrics on the fashion figure. First, let's look at how to render our fashion figure. Now, while rendering a fashion figure, you have to remember you have to always take at least 3 shades of the color you would like to render your fashion figure with. Now, while you are rendering your fashion figure, you can always take a skin tone as a base for your rendering of your fashion figure, and then you can add 2 darker shades of brown for a more duskier model, or you can go ahead and add 2 lighter shades of brown for a more lighter shaded model. Now, you always start off by shading in your lightest shade of brown, and then go ahead and increase your depth by adding darker shades of brown to your fashion figure. Remember, always leave certain areas of your fashion figure white in order to show the highlights that would be represented by the light facing the fashion figure. You also go ahead and add your shadows with the darkest shade of brown that you are using in order to add a certain depth to your fashion figure. These are the basic concepts that you will use in order to render a fashion figure. I will now show you on how you can render an entire fashion figure. So, now we will start illustrating our fashion illustration. The thing that you have to remember while rendering is you always start with the lightest shade and then build on it with the darker and then the darkest shade. So, we will go ahead and render. I will start off by rendering the hands of the model. So, I will be first putting a light shade for the entire illustration. Remember not to render the entire illustration, but only render around the corners, because we will be leaving a certain area of the illustration for the highlights of the model, because there will always be light falling on the model, and hence the highlights will show that kind of light area. Always shade in the direction in which your body is. So, if the hands are going downwards, make sure you shade downwards of the illustration. Make sure to remove any pencil marks that you have left. This will prevent the darkening of your illustration. If you notice, I am just shading on the outer areas of the illustration and not the entire illustration. This is to provide and create 3D effect on our illustration. Now that we have created a base, we will go ahead and start adding the brown as a second layer to the base of our fashion illustration. have added our second shade, so now we will go ahead and add our third shade of brown. This will be basically more of the outlines of the garment to give it the shadow detailing. Okay, so now we have finished illustrating the body, and so now we will start just adding details to our garments, and then we will go ahead and illustrate and add details to our face. So I have decided to take shades of blue for the swimming suit that she is wearing. So like we did for our body rendering, we will also go ahead and take 3 shades of blue for our garment rendering as well. Now we have finished drawing the garment detailing. Now we will go ahead and start adding features for our face and hair. Now once you have rendered your basic fashion figure, we will now learn on how you can render various types of fabrics on your fashion figure. We will look at heavyweight fabrics, we will look at lighter weight fabrics, and how your rendering would be different for each type of fabric. Now let's look at satins first. Satins and taffetas are more smooth and they reflect a lot of light. So when you're rendering your satin, make sure that you leave a lot of highlights on your satins and you have a lot of shadows in order to contrast those highlights. Remember, when you apply color for your satin, it should always be a smooth application of color in order to show the smooth folds of a satin fabric. Restrict yourself from adding a lot of texture on the fabric because satin is a very smooth falling fabric. You can draw your highlights on your fashion figure for your satin by using a white pencil in order to give a darker highlight for your fashion figure. You can add details with a black pen in order to finish off the rendering of your satin fabric. Now let's look at rendering velvets. Now when you're rendering a velvet is almost as similar to rendering a satin. The shine and the shadows are the same. However, when you're rendering a velvet is more of a heavyweight fabric than a satin. So make sure to show those kinds of folds on your garment while rendering a velvet. Also, a velvet has a texture or a pile on the fabric. So, make sure when you are outlining your garment to add that kind of texture and pile by a slight zigzag or wavy line while finishing off the outline of the garment. Now, let's look at drawing shears on your fashion illustration. Now, there are various shears available in the market. You have chiffon, you have organza, you have lace, you have tulle. Now, some of them are fully transparent, some of them are transparent. Now, when you are drawing a chiffon or a lace, make sure you have to always first draw or render your entire body of your fashion illustration, because this will be shown through your fabrics. Now, once you have drawn and shaded the figure of your fashion illustration, you can go ahead and draw out the entire sheer fabric over the fashion illustration. Now, remember, when you are shading or drawing a transparent fabrics, every seam line from your sleeve to your darts, all these seam lines will be visible through the fabrics. Even if there is a fold or a backward area to the fabric, that will also be visible through the fabric. So, make sure you add all these details while drawing a shear for a fashion illustration. Now, let's look at drawing brocades and sequence fabrics on your fashion illustration. Now, remember, a brocade and a sequin fabric has a lot of shine and has a lot of highlights. So, make sure that you add the same highlights and the shine and the shadows that you learned how to add while you are drawing your satins. Now, once you start drawing your brocade, always draw the base of your fabric, then go ahead and add your patterns on the fabric. You can also go ahead and add a little bit of glitter in order to show the shine of your zari that your brocade would have. Now, let's go ahead and learn how to draw various kinds of patterns and prints for your fabrics on your fashion illustration. Now, when you draw a printed fabric, make sure you always draw the print of the fabric first and then draw the base of the fabric. Once you draw the prints of the fabric with the main features and colors, you can start off by shading the fabric with the highlights and the shadow areas of the fabric. Now, always remember, leave a little bit of area for your highlights, for the light that will fall on your fashion illustration. Another thing that you should remember while drawing patterns and prints is that they will always get cut off with the folds of the garment. So, make sure wherever your garment is folding, make sure to draw half of the print, or wherever there is a seam line, make sure to draw half prints rather than fuller prints. That will show the reality of the fabric rather than giving you a more faker look. look at drawing checks and stripes on your fashion illustration. Now remember, when you draw a check or when you draw a stripe, it will follow the folds of your garment. So if your garment has a flare with folds at the bottom, you will start off by drawing the stripes in the direction of the folds and then move upward towards the belt or the stitch line of your skirt or your trouser. So your stripes and your checks will never be straight lines, but it will always be folded curved lines following the folds and the shape of the garment as well as the shape of the body. When you're drawing checks, wherever you're overlapping the lines of your checks, it will be a darker shade than the actual shade of the checks and the lines. Now this is how you draw checks and stripes for your fashion figure.